In the spring of 1988, I embarked on a long journey into the world of HIV and AIDS. Sydney, Australia, where we shot these images, was the first destination. I met and interviewed a dying AIDS patient for the first time in my life.
Please tell me your name.
My name is Lyle Taylor.
You are dying of AIDS right now. Can you tell me about your situation?
Yes. I discovered that I was antibody positive 4 years ago. Today, through sort of circumstances yesterday and today, and through physical symptoms, I thought I was dying. But I can't find the switch to switch life off.
Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Professor.
Have you had a good morning?
I've had an interesting morning.
Well, that's very good.
This patient is close to dying.
He is very close to dying. He knows that. We know that.
I just don't die.
But he just is hanging in there. In his bravery, he's renewing our determination to come to grips with this thing and to see if we can't find answers so that in future people like Lyle will not have to go through this suffering, because there is an enormous amount of suffering involved that he's being very brave about.
AIDS spread very rapidly in the homosexual community. It is not a homosexual disease, and it will be slower in the heterosexual community. But if they don't do something about it, that's their problem.
Later on, the same day as I did the interview, Dr. Dwyer called my hotel room in Sydney. He told me that Lyle Taylor had died 10 hours after I filmed him. The interview was his last contribution as an AIDS activist. To meet and film Lyle Taylor had a big impact on me, both as a person and as a filmmaker. These are images which I shot 20 years later in the spring of 2008 in the Kambio slum community outside Nairobi, Kenya, a country in the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic. Free access to antiretroviral treatment, ARV, did dramatically change the face of AIDS epidemic for countries like Kenya.
My name's Sky Nzambo, and I live in the Nairobi city slums of Kayole. I got HIV from my husband. I felt enough is enough. I left him and I went with my children. How are you today? Leo nataka tuongelele kitu moja tunaitaga nini? Stigma. Inaitwa nini? Stigma.
Can you tell a little about when you had self-stigma and how you overcome it?
I can say it was self-stigma which was dragging me even to think of killing myself. And when I got a lot of counseling, I came out of this stigma. And I like empowering women and people in general, people living with HIV and AIDS, to come out of that cocoon of stigmatizing themselves and live positively. One of my duties is counseling children who are HIV positive, and also those who are vulnerable, and also total orphan, to help them and come out of their problem and feel that there is somebody for them who can love them and give them support. Can I have a seat, my dear? Maureen, you have to be strong, eh?
Yes.
Yes. Even if your mother is not there, we are here for you, okay?
Yes.
In case of any problem, we will give you support as much as we can, okay?
Yes.
Yes.
30 years into the AIDS epidemic, you are a young AIDS activist, you're a student at Harvard. Why are you involved?
Well, mainly because of the indifference I see all around me, around the student body here at Harvard, around the gay community here in Boston. The indifference is there that wasn't there before. There were people in the streets teaching each other about safe sex and helping to prevent a disease that was killing people. Now that people can live with the disease and take a pill, I think people are forgetting that we need to continue that communication.
This you see in 1988 is really the peak of the ACT UP activism, the AIDS activism in New York, and they tried many new ways of touching people, influencing the government and policy, and they became known all over the world, you know, and they affected me. So I went to New York to film the ACT UP demonstrations in April 1988.
We must listen to the pain and the sorrow and the death. And we must say to the people, it is not just your problem or your problem, it is everybody's problem in this city.
So filmmakers, people think, can separate themselves because they're behind a camera. Did you feel separated from the movement, or did you feel part of it?
I felt part of the movement because you go to all these AIDS events and AIDS conferences, you meet all the people, it's like a big family. So I felt the part of the family and still feel part of the family. And the amazing thing is that there are many people that I met in the late 80s that are still active in the fight against HIV and AIDS.
You're going to have days where it's pain and other days where it's just more pain. And maybe some days where it's a good day where you can walk 4 blocks to go grocery shopping, but that's it. And, you know.
At my age, I shouldn't be here.
When you see the patients talking about their pain and suffering, what do you think?
One of the many things that's often forgotten today is how terrible this disease was. You know, patients that couldn't lift their arms from the bed, patients that became demented and blind. The horrible nature of the disease is something that's often forgotten. The response in San Francisco, the inclusion of the gay community and their organizations with the medical community, and the public health and political community, it happened here in a way that probably didn't happen anywhere else, at least not as soon. So this was really a model for the world.
When I embarked on my first long global journey in 1988 to film the human story of HIV and AIDS, the epidemic was out of control.
Are you afraid of AIDS?
Yes, we are, very much so. A lot has to do with drug use, intravenous use, and these type of people we come across every day.
I didn't go out there going out with different men. I had a husband to start with. I didn't use drugs. I didn't lead any kind of life to get AIDS, and here I have the virus.
In Pattaya, I sing also about it, you know. I scare also, but what can I do?
Only 2 options left in order to prevent AIDS. You must use the condom, because that's a very preventive measure. Second, you must be able to have only one partner and stick to that partner.
I've been in the IV drug using scene here for about 3 or 4 years. Subsequently, I borrowed the wrong syringe off the wrong person and gave myself a dose of AIDS.
इसका कोई इलाज नहीं। AIDS का विषाणु का नाम है HIV.
Depending on the patient, you have to explain about life, hope, and letting the patient have hope all the time, not just giving up life.
This virtually no case between the age of 5 and 14. Now, showing clearly that age group can be protected. So if we can focus attention into that age group, then I think there is hope. We'll have replaced hopelessness with hope, and fear with facts.
Professor Gallo, what is the responsibility of the scientists? Because here we have a disease that has to deal with prejudice, death and sex.
Our responsibility is to try to answer scientific issues, to try to address the problem of, in the laboratory, development of a vaccine, development of better therapy, how does the virus work, and then to offer widely our expertise in the areas we work for education of public, for education of our fellow colleagues.
The situation is not under control. Since we have no vaccine and no cure, the only way to stop or to slow down the spreading of the virus is by education, information, and as you know, this is going on in many countries.
Thank you for attending the 11th International Conference on AIDS in Vancouver.
Finally, the scientists could deliver some really good news. They did it at the International AIDS Conference in Vancouver, Canada in 1996. The antiretroviral treatment, ARV, was made official to the public. ARV changed the course of the AIDS epidemic forever. When I went out filming 2 years after the Vancouver conference, I noticed how the gap between rich and poor countries impacted the ARV distribution.
So 3 years ago, when I ended up sick in the hospital, I sort of thought that might have been my turn, because I had watched one friend after another get progressively sick and die. But I was just very lucky that I didn't get sick until the time that I did. And at that point, protease inhibitors were just around the corner.
Your viral load has jumped up again a little bit to about 28,000 copies.
About 6 o'clock in the morning, I get up and take Vitex. Early in the day, I'll take 2 of the Crixivan, 2.5 milliliters of At the end of the day, I take 3 Twice a day, I take Combivir, which is another one is Previon. While you take that, you have to also take sodium levels have gone down, so I'm taking sodium. Trinolin and Beneficin, those are just for nasal. To help with digestion. Zovirax for herpes virus. That's back in a week I'll take.
Given the list of medications that John's on, he probably, his medical care is running somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, I would imagine. It's something totally out of reach for most of the world.
I went from New York to Phnom Penh, Cambodia with my team. A dramatic contrast. 2 different worlds, the developed and the developing world. One with and one without ARV treatment. Sopip was a young Cambodian AIDS activist that I met in Phnom Penh. I spent a few days with him, filming with him, when he visited people living with HIV and AIDS. Cambodia was experiencing an exploding epidemic in 1998.
Through working with AIDS patients here in Phnom Penh, especially in the poor community, make us change a lot with the way we think. It change a lot because we see the real need of community people, which a lot of things that we have to do for them. When we think about the inequality between the rich and the poor world, I feel very angry because in the rich country, they spend $25,000 per year for one AIDS patient, and here in Phnom Penh, we have only $10, even less than $10 for an AIDS patient per year. So it's not fair to people here in Phnom Penh.
How was the situation in the world in 1998 when we filmed this?
The situation was very serious. I think HIV/AIDS was a frightening issue. I think everyone was scared of HIV. I think we didn't know much about it, and also we didn't have resource to respond. And at that time, very little support from outside as well. That's why I feel a little bit angry. We don't have much resources.
One important turning point in the history of HIV and AIDS was the International AIDS Conference in Durban in the year 2000. Here, AIDS activists, the medical community, international organizations, public health policymakers and the pharmaceutical companies all came together. The result was a drastically reduced price for ARV treatment in the developing world. Thanks to thousands of AIDS activists like Pip, the face of the Cambodian AIDS epidemic did change dramatically. Today, in 2011, Cambodia is regarded as a success story in the Asian response to HIV and AIDS. New infections are decreasing every year, and 90% of those in need receive free ARV treatment. Like in many countries, Cambodia's response to HIV and AIDS has helped pave the way for public health in the country. A new local public health infrastructure has been developed in Cambodia in order to monitor and support people living with HIV and AIDS who receive ARV treatment. At the same time, the Cambodian AIDS response has targeted injecting drug users with outreach, education and information campaigns like this one in Phnom Penh. And here, a new methadone program which we filmed in Phnom Penh in November 2011. At the clinic, the injecting heroin users regularly get a dose of methadone, and they are followed up by counseling sessions with each person. Here, images from an outreach project targeting young male sex workers in Phnom Penh. Also in those groups, new infections are going down every year. When I met Pip for the first time, he was a young AIDS activist. Today, he is leader of Cambodia's largest NGO focusing on HIV and AIDS, CANA. He still makes visits to the AIDS frontline. What are you doing here today?
I just come out here to check out with the home care team. You know, they on day-to-day basis they come every day, go out and visit patients at home. And so once in a while I just want to come out and see how things works here and try to support them sometimes on the spot. This patient, 1 year ago, before the home care team met him, he was dying and, you know, desperate and looking for help. And fortunately, the home care team found him out and, you know, found him here and referred him to the hospital. He got a treatment right away, and now a year later he can walk. He can, I think, a lot of improvement in his health.
បាទអត់ខ្ញុំវាមានអារម្មណ៍មួយយ៉ាងដែរប៉ុន្តែដូចទីហៅថាมันមានគេអ្នកមាក់ងាយទេគាត់ថាមានការរើសអើងច្រើនខ្ញុំបាត់មិត្តភ័ក្តិច្រើនណាស់ដែលគេដឹងបាទដល់ពេលខ្ញុំប្រាប់គេត្រង់គេដឹងកាលដំបូងហ្នឹងបាទកាលដំបូងហ្នឹងដែរខ្ញុំទៅបាត់មិត្តភ័ក្តិច្រើនណាស់បាទសូម្បីថាគេរើសអើងហើយខ្ញុំក៏មិនស្អីទៅក្បែរគេទេអ្នកខ្លះក៏គេរើសអ្នកខ្លះក៏គេរើសបាទ
Stigma, I think a lot of change in this too. I think it used to be very difficult for the home care team to come out to the community and visit the patient at home. You know, people didn't talk any good thing about AIDS at all at that time. But now, you know, it's very open. Everyone knows, and everyone just thinks it's just a chronic disease. And you know, we have specific treatment for them, and they can help. And so everyone knows, and the home care team is smiling with the patient, and the patient is welcoming them to come to their place. Now it's okay. I think with treatment, people can get many other things after they get their health back. You know.
You think we can end AIDS?
I hope so. I think if we work together, I think rich and poor work together, community, patient, government, donors, all work together. I think we can end the AIDS maybe in 20 years.
The international AIDS conferences play an important role in getting committed people from all over the world together, promoting the global AIDS response and universal access to ARV. These images are from the latest one in Vienna, Austria, in July 2010. AIDS and stigma was an important highlight at that conference.
What is stigma?
I guess stigma is the discrimination often that is associated with living with HIV that isn't actually rooted in any fact, any science, but more in a psychological aversion to people living with HIV.
One thing we've learned over 30 years from this epidemic is that the most powerful deterrent to fighting AIDS is the stigma and discrimination that it carries throughout the world. So unless we can end stigma and discrimination, we will never see the end of this epidemic. We will never be able to fight it effectively.
My name is Gracia Violeta. I am from La Paz. This is my city, the city of La Paz in Bolivia. When I was 23 years old, I discovered that I'm HIV positive, and I began a fight for access to treatment in Bolivia together with some colleagues in the time in which people were actually dying every week because of HIV and AIDS. I was one night coming back home at 3 a.m. drunk, and I decided to have a shortcut. But in that corner, suddenly from nowhere, two men appeared, one on front and one behind me. They took me to the end of this alley, and in the end of that alley, they both raped me. By that time, I didn't know I was at risk of HIV, but I knew that rape situation changed me forever. Now that I studied the issue, the connections between violence against women and HIV, I can tell you that's so evident that we cannot avoid working on that. And especially in countries like Bolivia and regions like Latin America, you really have to link those two issues, violence against women and HIV and AIDS. Right now we are in Trinidad. This is a small city in Bolivia. Stigma and discrimination in these cities are very strong. So there is a need for me to come from other cities and help raising awareness against the stigma and discrimination.
Una población tan calurosa como siempre.
Metro Teen AIDS is a youth-led network in Washington, D.C., focusing on reaching out and educating young people about HIV, AIDS, and safe sex.
Always.
That's good. I do this because I feel it's a need in the population, because a lot of people are ignorant about HIV and AIDS, and even if they do know some facts, they probably don't know all. Heterosexual, gay, bisexual, other. You straight? I'm straight. All right.
Young people can teach adults so much about HIV and AIDS. Just by, if adults would just stop and listen to them, they can teach us so much about protecting ourselves, about decision making, about how to handle peer pressure.
This is a part of Philadelphia Public Housing. This is West Park. Actually, I grew up in this building right over here. But it is in one of the zip codes that are, disproportionately affected by HIV, which is 19104.
Why is the infection rate so high here?
It's poverty. And whenever there's poverty, you're going to see people disproportionately affected by a lot of different things. It's unemployment, it's teen pregnancy, it's HIV, it's hepatitis C, it's cardiovascular disease, it's hunger. And a lot of those issues, unfortunately, follow the poor, and this is one of those areas.
The epidemic in America is clearly a black disease. Black people in the U.S. represent 10 to 12% of the U.S. population, and yet we are now nearly 50% of the 1.2 million Americans living with HIV today. Stigma has been an incredibly big barrier in responding to the AIDS epidemic throughout the history of the epidemic. And stigma continues to play a role in preventing the development of appropriate response to the AIDS epidemic.
This is the Sayre Health Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, part of Sayre High School, and they offer primary care and women's health services here. And we're having a community health day, and they're offering free HIV testing, and it's free to the community. Want to have a seat? Okay. All right. So have you ever had a test before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So what we're going to do is a quick mouth swab. I'm going to ask you some questions that I ask everybody. Okay. I'm going to get all in your business. Okay. But just to kind of prepare you for that. Okay.
Why are you involved in this?
Because I believe that, you know, it's a for us, by us solution. You know, this is primarily affecting the Black community, and I feel like the Black community needs to step up to be able to deal with it. So I have a personal stake in it. I have to tell women that look like me, that look like my mother, that look like my sister, that they're infected with a disease that's preventable, and I want to do something about it. And so you ready for your results?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay. And here they are, and you are negative.
Okay.
Very good. Okay. And we want you to stay that way. We have some condoms available out front, and some literature.
Really, we have to make sure that no matter who you are, no matter where you are in Black America, that you are engaged. And if we're successful in building that kind of integration of HIV in where Black people live, work, and play, we then have a chance of changing the cultural norms. And at the end of the day, that's what it will take to end the AIDS epidemic in America, our ability to change the cultural realities and cultural norms in our communities.
The first stages of a person living with HIV and AIDS who just starts medication, this is the time when these people need encouragement. If we are there to give assistance or care, these people will continue with their medication.
Batu wafwane kwena badi kwa toku chitana nikane ukuleto wafuirisho sana pamoja wandipantu ukuabula vena nga ino shitadi mbinga na adifu wano kufwa pantu na adifye panga ndafie ndela ala fefidia nokula tontonkanya sana nkachiteshani nokulangira mu pabantu atsirimba bala tampokula bakalanseka so nishinashire kumanya ababene bana ma basangwa pano abena bankoselesha okuisa kuno na isa afikana kuno na umfonefu bankoseleshe na isa sango ko bati awo badi shomwe wandi.
Stigma is difficult to handle. There are different types of stigma, and one of the stigmas which people don't talk about is against NGOs or organizations in the fight against HIV and AIDS. They are seen as people making money out of AIDS. So when you tell people, for example, I'm working for this organization, the first thing which comes into their mind is, oh, you guys are the ones making money. I think that frustrates the efforts in the fight against the pandemic. Then also there's a stigma for the people. If, for example, I mean, we're living in a society where a lot of people have no information, and then few people have the information.
From the time I started experiencing stigma from my family members, I tried by all means to educate them, and this was also through my work with the network of people living with HIV and AIDS. The education I've shared with my family members, I've come to accept, and they accept me up to now.
In South Africa, more than 5 million people are living with HIV and AIDS. It's the hardest hit country in the world. But also a response has emerged, stronger and stronger. Treatment Action Campaign, TAC, is one of the most respected and important AIDS organizations in the world. It started in Cape Town.
My name is Caroline, and I work for the Treatment Action Campaign. And today we are going to see one of our door-to-door campaigns in Khayelitsha, a township in South Africa.
My name is Lisha Jamini. I'm the Deputy General Secretary of the Treatment Action Campaign. The biggest political challenges now for tech is funding for HIV work. We find that many funders are pulling away from funding HIV and AIDS work, and it's really getting difficult for civil society organizations or organizations working in the HIV and AIDS field. And we know that this is very important because we are able to reach communities where government is not able to really to reach. We do door-to-door educating people.
So we are here at Sister Bisa's house. Sister Bisa has been a victim of being discriminated against and being stigmatized by one of her neighbors. So we just want to find out what the her whole experience was around that. Hi Sister Bisa. Hey. So what she's saying is that she was discriminated against by one of her neighbors that cursed her out in front of everyone by saying that she is HIV positive. I started losing weight. Obviously, she was stressing about it, and she had nightmares. Even when she's sleeping, she would have nightmares about the trauma that this neighbor of hers is putting her under.
If the funders continue to pull out, the end result in the HIV would be that people will not be educated about HIV and how better to take care of their lives. We'll see people dying from AIDS-related illnesses. We'll see people dying from TB, which Global Fund is also funding. Then it means we're back to square one, where people die because of AIDS-related illnesses.
Are you afraid that the funding to HIV and AIDS from the developed countries will go down?
Yeah, I think I'm very much concerned about that too, because having heard a lot of story about the funding for the future program, I think not just me, I think the patient, the home care team, the community, they're also concerned about that too, because our government do not have resources to support the program for a longer term. But what we try to do to bring the cost down a little bit, and at the same time advocate to donor to rich country, developed country, to continue their commitment, their funding, so that we can get AIDS-free generation maybe in 20 years from now.
When you think about the epidemic in a global way, that you've got to involve countries to take ownership of their problem. You can partner with them, you can assist them, but you have to do that in a partnership way, so that it isn't as if you're giving them something and that's it. They've got to partner with you to take ownership of the problem in their own country.
How do you look on the future now?
Well, I think the future, in my mind, is optimistic in my mind. We have scientific advances that are clearly showing that the things that we want to implement work. So unlike years ago when we weren't sure what you can do to put an end to this pandemic, we absolutely know now what we can do to do that. We just need to implement it.
It is absolutely crucial that we do not become victims of our own success. I mean, the story of AIDS until now is a story of enormous challenges, but also huge successes. The worst thing that could happen is to become complacent. There's now a commitment to millions of people who are dependent on treatment to continue to be alive and be productive members of the global society. That commitment has to be sustained, but it has to be sustained in a way that allows for future needs and requirements to also be met.
We need to understand that we are actually a huge movement that has tremendous power, and we need to harness that power very well in order to make sure that the issue of HIV/AIDS does not just simply disappear off the focus, off the agenda, off the table.
I think that the battle against HIV will be won, and young people are our hope. They are the soldiers. We have to start educating them. If we have a young generation which understand the disease, which are keen to win the battle, then I think that's the direction to go.
25 years ago, I embarked on a long journey, documenting the human story of HIV and AIDS. During this journey, I have learned that it is very important to reflect upon and try to understand the history of the epidemic. In these times of economic crisis in the world, it is extremely important to keep HIV and AIDS high up on the political agenda. I myself will do my part. I will continue my long journey documenting the human story of HIV and AIDS.
Figure 2004 mpamene nitakumanda phungu nkundiuza kuti ndipite kuchipata ndikayezese magazi yanga ndipo ntakayezesa magazi anandipeza kuti ndindika chirombo ka HIV kamene kakuyambisa matenda a AIDS. Mankhwala amene ndimamwawo ma ARV amene makhulupirana andipasa mphamvu ndi awa moti makola ebombo chalo mujalo muri eziro ndenge makola ebombo chalo mujalo muri eziro dokotala